Lieutenant Sarah stepped out of the military transport vehicle, her polished boots hitting the asphalt of Naval Air Station with quiet confidence. The Virginia morning was crisp, and the smell of jet fuel mixed with ocean salt filled her nostrils as she adjusted her service uniform and grabbed her duffel bag. At 28, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had earned every stripe on her sleeve through merit, not connections. The base sprawled before her like a small city, with hangars stretching toward the horizon and the distant roar of F-18 Super Hornets conducting morning exercises. Sarah had been stationed at smaller facilities before, but was different. This was one of the Navy's premier fighter bases, home to elite squadrons and some of the most advanced aircraft in the fleet. She felt a familiar thrill at the prospect of new challenges, unaware that her biggest test wouldn't come from the skis. As she made her way toward the administration building, Sarah noticed the curious glances from personnel going about their morning routines. Some nodded respectfully at her lieutenant's insignia, while others simply stared. She was used to being one of the few women in her field, but something felt different here. The look seemed more calculating, more judgmental than usual. "You must be the new flight control officer," came a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a tall man in his mid-30s approaching, his commander's insignia catching the morning light. His smile seemed friendly enough, but his eyes held a coolness that immediately put her on guard. "Lieutenant reporting for duty, sir," she replied crisply, offering a proper salute. "Commander Blake," he said, returning the salute with practiced ease. "Welcome to, I run the flight operations here, so we'll be working closely together." His tone was professional, but Sarah detected an undertone she couldn't quite place. "I have to say, when I heard they were sending us a new lieutenant, I expected someone with a bit more experience." Sarah kept her expression neutral despite the slight. "I have 4 years of flight control experience, sir, including 18 months at Naval Air Station managing F-35 operations." Repeated, his smile becoming more condescending. "Smaller operation than what we run here. This is the big leagues, Lieutenant. We handle some of the most complex flight operations on the East Coast. Our pilots are the best of the best, and they don't have patience for controllers who can't keep up." Before Sarah could respond, was joined by 2 other officers. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres, a sharp-featured woman who looked to be in her early 40s, and Major David from the Marine Squadron based at. Both regarded Sarah with the same measuring look she'd been receiving all morning. "This is our new flight controller," said to his colleagues, "fresh from the West Coast." "Really?" Torres said, her voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "They're sending us junior officers now? I thought this position required someone with significant carrier experience." Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but maintained her composure. "I have extensive experience with both land-based and carrier operations, ma'am. My record speaks for itself." Major chuckled, though there was no warmth in it. "Records can be embellished. What matters here is performance under pressure. Our Marine pilots push their aircraft to the limit, and we need controllers who understand that. No offense, but you look like you'd be more comfortable behind a desk than in a control tower during a hot recovery." The comment stung, partly because Sarah recognized the old stereotype that had followed her throughout her career. She had worked twice as hard as her male counterparts to prove she belonged in military aviation, and she thought those days of having to justify her presence were behind her. "I appreciate your concern for operational safety," Sarah replied evenly. "I'm confident my training and experience have prepared me for whatever challenges this assignment presents." Exchanged a glance with his colleagues that didn't go unnoticed. "We'll see about that. Torres here will show you to your quarters and get you oriented. Your first shift starts tomorrow at 600. We'll throw you right into the deep end and see how you swim." As and walked away, their conversation audible enough for Sarah to catch fragments about diversity hires and lowered standards. She felt her face flush with anger, but forced herself to remain professional. This wasn't her first encounter with such attitudes, and it wouldn't be her last. Lieutenant Commander Torres led her across the base toward the junior officers' quarters, their conversation minimal and stilted. The housing complex was modern and well-maintained, a marked improvement from some of Sarah's previous assignments. As they walked, Torres provided a running commentary on base procedures and protocols, but her tone remained distant and formal. "The flight control tower operates on 12-hour shifts," Torres explained as they stopped in front of a 2-story building. "You'll be working primarily with the day shift initially, handling both fixed-wing and rotary operations. The pace here is significantly faster than anything you've experienced before. Sarah wanted to challenge that assumption, but held her tongue. She was already facing enough skepticism without appearing argumentative on her first day. Your immediate supervisor is commander, but operational decisions go through me as well, Torres continued. We maintain very high standards here, Lieutenant. The pilots who fly out of this base are among the Navy's elite, and they deserve controllers who can match their level of excellence. The message was clear: prove yourself or get out. Sarah had heard variations of this speech before, usually from people who had never worked with her long enough to see what she could do. They reached her assigned room on the second floor, and Torres handed her a key along with a thick folder of base regulations and procedures. Familiarize yourself with everything in there before tomorrow morning. Doesn't tolerate officers who aren't prepared. After Torres left, Sarah stood alone in her new quarters, looking around the sparse but functional space. A single bed, a desk, a closet, and a small window overlooking the flight line where aircraft were already busy with afternoon operations. She could hear the distant rumble of engines and the occasional boom of jets breaking the sound barrier during training exercises. Setting her duffel bag on the bed, Sarah began unpacking while mentally preparing for what lay ahead. She had faced skeptical colleagues before, but something about and his team felt different. Their dismissiveness seemed more organized, more deliberate than the usual hazing that came with being the new person on base. As she hung up her uniforms, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her mentor, Captain Maria, who had helped guide her career over the past several years. Hope the first day went well at your new assignment. Remember what I taught you about earning respect through action, not words. You've got what it takes. Sarah smiled at the message, feeling a renewed sense of determination. Captain had been one of the first women to command a fighter squadron, and her advice had been invaluable throughout Sarah's career. She had taught Sarah that respect in the military wasn't given freely, especially to women in male-dominated fields. It had to be earned through competence, consistency, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. That evening, Sarah made her way to the base mess hall for dinner, hoping to get a better feel for the social dynamics among the personnel. The large dining facility buzzed with conversation from various tables, where officers and enlisted personnel gathered after their duty shifts. She grabbed a tray and selected a simple meal of grilled chicken, vegetables, and rice before looking for a place to sit. Most tables were already occupied by established groups, their conversations flowing easily among people who had clearly known each other for months or years. Sarah spotted an empty table near the windows and settled in to eat while observing the social hierarchies playing out around her. "Mind if I join you?" asked a voice nearby. Sarah looked up to see a young ensign with pilot's wings on his uniform, holding his own dinner tray. He appeared to be about her age, with an open, friendly expression that was a refreshing change from the reception she'd received earlier. "Please do," Sarah replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I'm Lieutenant, just arrived today." "Ensign Mike Parker," he said, settling into his seat. "I fly with VF-143, one of the Super Hornet squadrons here. Heard we were getting a new flight controller. How are you finding so far?" Sarah considered her response carefully. "Still getting oriented. It's certainly an impressive facility." Mike nodded enthusiastically. "Best posting I've had so far. The flying here is incredible and the facilities are top-notch. Runs a tight ship in flight ops, though he can be pretty demanding. Hope you're ready for a challenge." "I think I can handle it," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt at the moment. Their conversation was interrupted when Commander approached their table, flanked by Lieutenant Commander Torres and several other officers Sarah didn't recognize. The group had clearly been drinking at the officers' club, their faces flushed, and their voices slightly louder than appropriate for the dining facility. "Well, well," said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Getting acquainted with our pilots already, Lieutenant? That's good, because tomorrow you'll be responsible for keeping them safe in the air." Sarah stood respectfully as the senior officers approached. "Yes, sir. I'm looking forward to working with everyone." "Are you now?" Torres interjected, her voice carrying a slight slur. "That's refreshing to hear. We've had some real disasters in that position over the years. Officers who thought they knew everything but couldn't handle the pressure when things got complicated." One of the other officers, a lieutenant commander Sarah hadn't met, leaned forward conspiratorially. "Remember that controller we had 2 years ago? froze up during an emergency recovery and nearly caused a mid-air collision. Had to be transferred out after just 3 months. Nodded sagely. That's exactly why we're so careful about who we trust in that tower. One mistake up there can cost lives and millions of dollars in aircraft. We need people who can think fast and stay calm under pressure. Sarah felt the weight of their collective gaze, the unspoken challenge hanging in the air. These weren't casual comments. They were deliberate attempts to undermine her confidence before she had even started the job. "I understand the gravity of the responsibility, sir," she replied firmly. "I take the safety of pilots and aircraft very seriously." "I'm sure you do," said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just remember that understanding responsibility and handling it are two different things. We'll see which category you fall into tomorrow morning." As the group moved away, continuing their evening at the officers' club, Sarah sat back down with Ensign Parker, who looked uncomfortable with what he had just witnessed. "Don't let them get to you," he said quietly. "It's always tough on new people, but that seemed a bit excessive even for him." Sarah appreciated the support, but she could see the concern in Parker's eyes. If even the junior pilots were noticing the hostility, it was worse than she had initially thought. The rest of the evening passed quietly as Sarah returned to her quarters and spent several hours studying the base procedures manual. The flight operations were indeed more complex than anything she had handled before, with multiple types of aircraft, varying mission requirements, and coordination with civilian air traffic control for the surrounding area. As she prepared for bed, Sarah's phone rang with a call from her younger brother Alex, a software engineer in California who had always been her strongest supporter. "Hey sis, how's the new assignment going?" he asked cheerfully. "Challenging," Sarah replied honestly. "The usual adjustment period, but a bit more intense than I expected." "You mean they're giving you a hard time because you're a woman in a boys' club again?" Sarah had never been able to hide much from Alex. "Something like that, but I've dealt with worse. I just need to prove myself and things will settle down." "You shouldn't have to prove yourself any more than anyone else," Alex said with the indignation of a protective younger brother. "You've got more experience and better performance reviews than half the people at that base." "That's not how it works in the military, and you know it," Sarah replied. "Especially not for women. I have to be better than good enough. I have to be exceptional." "Then be exceptional," Alex said simply. "You always have been." After ending the call, Sarah lay in bed listening to the sounds of the base settling into its nighttime rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the whine of jet engines as aircraft returned from evening training missions. Tomorrow would bring her first real test in the control tower, and she knew that, and his allies would be watching for any sign of weakness or incompetence. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been preparing for moments like this her entire career. Every challenge, every slight, every attempt to make her quit had only made her stronger and more determined to succeed. She had no intention of giving them the satisfaction of seeing her fail. Sarah's alarm sounded at 500, giving her enough time to shower, dress, and grab a quick breakfast before her first shift in the control tower. She had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing aircraft specifications and emergency procedures for the various types of military aircraft that operated out of. Her stomach churned with a mixture of nerves and anticipation as she made her way across the pre-dawn base toward the towering control facility that would be her primary workplace. The control tower was a modern structure rising nearly 200 feet above the flight line, providing controllers with a panoramic view of the entire airfield and surrounding airspace. As Sarah climbed the stairs to the control room, she could hear the familiar sounds of radio chatter and the quiet hum of electronic equipment that formed the backdrop of every air traffic control facility. The controller she was replacing, a weary-looking lieutenant named Davis, greeted her with obvious relief. He had been pulling double shifts to cover the position until Sarah's arrival, and his exhaustion was evident in every movement. "Thank God you're here," Davis said as he began gathering his charts and personal items. "I've been working 16-hour days for the past week. Been breathing down everyone's necks about maintaining full coverage." Sarah took her position at the primary control station, familiarizing herself with the radar displays, radio equipment, and computer systems that would be her tools for managing aircraft movements. The setup was more sophisticated than anything she had worked with before, with multiple screens showing real-time aircraft positions, weather data, and flight plan information. Current traffic is light, Davis explained as he pointed to various blips on the radar screen. 3 F-18s returning from a night training mission, due to land in the next 15 minutes. Marine helicopter doing pattern work on the parallel runway. And we've got a C-130 transport inbound from Norfolk in about 30 minutes. Sarah nodded, making notes on her duty log while mentally organizing the sequence of operations she would need to manage. The returning fighters would have priority for landing, followed by the transport aircraft. The helicopter could continue its pattern work as long as it didn't interfere with the fixed-wing operations. Usually shows up around 6:30 to check on the morning shift, Davis added with a knowing look. He's been asking a lot of questions about readiness and procedures lately, more than usual if you know what I mean. The meaning was clear, was planning to watch Sarah's performance closely, looking for any excuse to question her competence. She had expected as much, but having it confirmed still made her jaw clench with determination. Davis finished his handover briefing and headed home, leaving Sarah alone in the control tower as the base began waking up around her. The first pale light of dawn was beginning to creep across the horizon, and she could see ground crews already moving aircraft and equipment on the flight line below. Tower, Viper 201 flight of 3 requesting approach and landing, crackled over the radio, the first communication of Sarah's shift. Viper 201, Tower, you're cleared for approach runway 5 left, wind 60 at 8 knots, visibility 10 miles. Sarah responded smoothly, her voice calm and professional despite the butterflies in her stomach. The next hour passed without incident as Sarah managed the arriving aircraft and coordinated with ground control for taxi instructions. Her movements were efficient and precise, each radio call crisp and clear. She found herself falling into the familiar rhythm that had sustained her throughout her career, the combination of technical knowledge and situational awareness that made good controllers exceptional. Just after 6:30, Commander appeared in the control tower, accompanied by Lieutenant Commander Torres and a Chief Petty Officer Sarah didn't recognize. Positioned himself where he could observe Sarah's work without interfering, but his presence was impossible to ignore. "Good morning, Lieutenant," said formally. "How's your first morning going?" "Good morning, sir. No issues so far. Traffic has been moderate with normal approaches and departures," Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off the radar display. "That's good to hear. Today should be interesting. We've got a full training schedule with multiple squadrons conducting various exercises. Plus, we're expecting some VIP arrivals later this morning." Sarah felt a chill at his tone. It was clear he was hoping the increased complexity would expose some weakness in her abilities. "Tower, Marine Heavy 47 requesting departure runway 5 right," came a new radio call. Sarah quickly checked her traffic display and runway status before responding. "Marine Heavy 47, Tower, hold short runway 5 right, traffic on final approach." On her radar, she could see an F-35 Lightning approaching for landing on the parallel runway, its closure rate bringing it into potential conflict with the Marine transport helicopter if she cleared it for takeoff too early. Stepped closer to her station, ostensibly to observe the traffic situation, but clearly looking over her shoulder at every decision she made. Sarah forced herself to ignore his presence and focus entirely on the aircraft under her control. "Viper 303, Tower, turn left heading 270, descend and maintain 2,000 feet for traffic separation," she directed the approaching fighter. "Left 270, descend and maintain 2,000, Viper 303. The separation was textbook perfect, providing adequate spacing between the landing fighter and the waiting helicopter while maintaining efficient traffic flow. Sarah waited until the F-35 had cleared the runway intersection before clearing the Marine helicopter for departure. "Marine Heavy 47, Tower, runway 5 right cleared for takeoff. Contact departure on 124.35. Runway 5 right cleared for takeoff. Switching to departure, Marine Heavy 47. Watched the entire sequence in silence, occasionally making notes on a small notepad. Sarah couldn't tell if his observations were positive or negative, but she continued focusing on her duties as the morning traffic picked up significantly. Around 800, the pace became much more challenging as multiple training flights began launching for the day's exercises. Sarah found herself managing 8 aircraft simultaneously, coordinating departures with arrivals while maintaining safe separation between aircraft of vastly different sizes and performance capabilities. "Lieutenant," Torres called out from behind her, "we're getting word that a C-5 Galaxy transport is being diverted here due to weather at Dover. That's going to require special handling procedures." Sarah's pulse quickened. The C-5 Galaxy was one of the largest aircraft in the military fleet, requiring extended runway length and special wake turbulence considerations. Landing such a massive aircraft while managing normal fighter operations would test every skill she possessed. "What's the estimated arrival time?" Sarah asked while continuing to monitor her current traffic. 20 minutes out, and Lieutenant," Torres added with what might have been a slight smirk, "the aircraft is carrying a full load of equipment and personnel, no margin for error." Sarah acknowledged the information and immediately began planning how to accommodate the heavy transport. She would need to sequence her existing traffic to create a sufficient gap for the C-5's approach and landing, while ensuring adequate wake turbulence spacing for any aircraft following behind it. "Tower, reach 435, heavy requesting priority approach, low fuel state," came the radio call from the C-5 pilot, his voice carrying the controlled tension of someone dealing with an emergency situation. Sarah felt the tension intensify behind her as she responded to the emergency. "Reach 435 heavy, tower, roger your priority approach. Current wind 70 at 12 knots, runway 5 left available, altimeter 30.15. Request straighten approach runway 5 left, we're showing minimum fuel reserves," the C-5 pilot replied. Sarah's mind raced through the traffic situation. She had 3 F-18s in the pattern, a Marine helicopter conducting approaches, and 2 fighters preparing for departure. Giving the C-5 priority meant rearranging everything else while ensuring no conflicts developed. "All aircraft, tower, be advised we have priority traffic inbound. Viper flight, extend your downwind and expect extended spacing. Marine 27, continue approach runway 5 right, expedite landing and taxi clear." The next 10 minutes tested every aspect of Sarah's training and experience. She smoothly redirected aircraft, adjusted approach sequences, and coordinated with ground control to ensure the massive C-5 would have clear taxi routes once it landed. Continued his silent observation, occasionally whispering comments to Torres that Sarah couldn't hear over the radio chatter. "Reach 435 heavy, tower, runway 5 left cleared to land, wind 70 at 12. Cleared to land 5 left, reach 435 heavy." Sarah watched on radar as the massive transport aircraft made its final approach, its huge bulk dwarfing the fighters that had been holding in extended patterns. The landing was flawless, and she immediately began coordinating ground movement to clear the runway for normal operations. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant," came a voice from behind her. Sarah turned to see a Marine colonel she hadn't met before, his silver eagles gleaming in the morning light filtering through the tower windows. "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, still focused on clearing her remaining traffic. "Colonel Martinez, Base Operations Officer," the Marine introduced himself. "I was monitoring that emergency recovery from downstairs, textbook example of priority handling under pressure." His expression darkened slightly at the unexpected praise, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Lieutenant is still learning our procedures here, but she seems to be adapting well enough." The backhanded compliment wasn't lost on Colonel Martinez, who raised an eyebrow at his tone. "Seemed like more than adequate performance to me, Commander. Emergency recoveries like that don't always go so smoothly." As the immediate crisis passed and normal traffic flow resumed, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had handled her first real test successfully, managing a complex emergency situation while maintaining safe operations for all other aircraft. Scrutiny had been intense, but she had proven her capabilities under pressure. The rest of the morning shift passed more quietly, with routine training flights and normal traffic patterns. Eventually left the tower, but not before making several pointed comments about the need for consistent performance and the importance of following established procedures. When Lieutenant Davis arrived to relieve her at 1400, Sarah felt emotionally drained despite the successful shift. The constant pressure of observation combined with the challenging traffic situations had taken their toll. "Heard you had quite a morning," Davis said as they began the change of shift briefing. "Word is already getting around about how you handled that C5 emergency." "Just doing the job," Sarah replied modestly, though she felt a sense of pride in her performance. "Didn't seem too happy when he left here," Davis observed. "But then again, he never seems happy about anything lately." Sarah completed her shift paperwork and headed to the mess hall for a late lunch, hopping for a quiet meal before her evening study session. The dining facility was busier during the lunch rush, filled with personnel from all corners of the base discussing their morning activities. As she found a table and began eating, Sarah overheard fragments of conversation from nearby tables. Some personnel were discussing the morning's emergency landing, and she was surprised to hear several positive comments about the air traffic control handling of the situation. "Did you see how smoothly that C5 recovery went?" one pilot was saying to his colleagues. "Whoever was working the tower did a fantastic job managing all that traffic." "Yeah, I was holding with Viper flight during that whole thing," another pilot replied. "Never felt like we were in any danger, even with that much complexity going on." The recognition from the air crews meant more to Sarah than any official commendation could have. These were the people whose lives depended on her competence, and their approval validated her confidence in her abilities. Her quiet lunch was interrupted when approached her table, his expression serious and somewhat cold. "Lieutenant, I need to speak with you about this morning's operations," he said formally. Sarah set down her fork and gave her full attention. "Yes, sir." "While your handling of the emergency situation was adequate, I noticed several areas where your procedures could be improved. I want you to report to my office at 1600 for a detailed debriefing." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had thought her performance was exemplary, but was clearly determined to find fault with her work. "Of course, sir. I'll be there at 1600. Nodded curtly and walked away, leaving Sarah staring at her half-finished meal with a growing sense of dread. It seemed that no matter how well she performed, was committed to making her life difficult. What Sarah didn't know was that her morning performance had attracted attention from someone far more important than Commander, and that her real challenges were just beginning. At exactly 1600 hours, Sarah knocked on Commander's office door, her service record folder tucked under her arm, and her mind prepared for whatever criticism he planned to deliver. The office was decorated with the usual collection of military photographs, awards, and operational charts that adorned most senior officers' workspaces. "Enter," called from behind his desk. Sarah stepped inside and assumed the position of attention. "Lieutenant reporting as ordered, sir." Gestured to a chair in front of his desk without looking up from the paperwork he was reviewing. "Sit down, Lieutenant. We need to discuss several concerns I have about your performance this morning." Sarah settled into the chair, maintaining perfect posture despite her growing anxiety about where this conversation was heading. Finally looked up from his papers, his expression cold and calculating. "While you managed to avoid any major incidents during the emergency recovery, your radio procedures were sloppy, your traffic spacing was inefficient, and your coordination with ground control was substandard," began, ticking off items on his fingers. Sarah felt her jaw tighten but forced herself to remain composed. "Sir, could you be more specific about which procedures you found inadequate? I followed standard emergency protocols throughout the event." His eyes flashed with irritation at being questioned. "Don't interrupt me, Lieutenant. I'm not finished with my assessment." He leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying his position of authority. "Furthermore, your general attitude suggests you think you already know everything there is to know about air traffic control. That kind of arrogance is dangerous in a high-stakes environment like this." "Sir, I don't believe my attitude has been." "I said don't interrupt," snapped. "You'll speak when I give you permission to speak." Sarah bit back her response, realizing that this meeting had nothing to do with legitimate performance concerns and everything to do with establishing dominance. Was using his rank and position to intimidate her, hoping to break her confidence and force her into a submissive role. "Now, as I was saying," continued, "I have serious reservations about your ability to handle the responsibilities of this position. I'm considering recommending your transfer to a facility more suited to your limited experience level." The threat hung in the air between them like a sword. Sarah knew that a negative recommendation from could effectively end her career progression and possibly force her out of air traffic control entirely. She also knew that she couldn't let him see how much his words affected her. "I understand your concerns, sir," Sarah replied carefully. "However, I believe my performance this morning demonstrated that I can handle complex situations effectively. The emergency recovery was completed safely with no incidents." His expression darkened further. "That emergency recovery succeeded despite your inexperience, not because of your competence. You were lucky, Lieutenant, and luck isn't something we can count on in military aviation." Before Sarah could respond, his phone rang with an urgent tone that indicated a priority call. He answered with obvious irritation at the interruption. "Here, yes, sir. Understood, sir. I'll be right there." He hung up the phone and stood abruptly, his demeanor shifting from confrontational to anxious. "This meeting is postponed, Lieutenant. Report to the base commander's office immediately." Sarah felt confused by the sudden change in his attitude. "Sir, did you say the base commander wants to see me?" "That's what I said," replied tersely. "Captain Richardson's office right now, and Lieutenant," he added as she reached the door, "whatever you discuss in that meeting, remember that your immediate supervisor is still me." Sarah left his office with her mind racing. Being summoned to see the base commander on her second day was highly unusual, especially for a lieutenant. Captain Richardson was a respected officer with nearly 30 years of service, known for running a tight ship and maintaining high standards throughout the base. The walk to the base commander's office took her through the administrative complex, past offices filled with personnel managing the countless details required to keep a major military installation operational. Sarah tried to imagine what Captain Richardson might want to discuss with her, hoping it wasn't related to some complaint had already filed. Captain Richardson's aide, a professional-looking petty officer, directed Sarah to wait in a small conference room adjacent to the commander's office. The room was furnished with a polished wooden table, several leather chairs, and walls lined with photographs documenting the base's history and notable visitors. "Lieutenant," came a voice from the doorway. Sarah stood and turned to see Captain Richardson entering the room, followed by two individuals she didn't recognize. Richardson was a distinguished-looking man in his late 50s, with gray hair and the weathered features of someone who had spent decades in military service. "Yes, sir, Lieutenant reporting as ordered." "Please sit down," Richardson said, gesturing to the conference table. "I'd like you to meet Admiral and Captain Michael Torres from Naval Personnel Command." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of Admiral, one of the Navy's most senior female officers and a legend in naval aviation. The presence of such high-ranking officials was both intimidating and mystifying. "Lieutenant," Admiral said as they all took seats around the table, "thank you for joining us on such short notice. I understand you've only been at for 2 days." "Yes, ma'am. I arrived Monday morning." Admiral consulted a folder in front of her before continuing. "I've been reviewing your service record, and I must say it's quite impressive. Top of your class at Air Traffic Control School, outstanding performance ratings at every assignment, and several commendations for handling emergency situations." Sarah felt her confusion growing. "Thank you, ma'am. I've tried to maintain high standards throughout my career." "That's exactly why we're here," Captain Richardson interjected. "Admiral has been conducting a special review of air traffic control operations at major installations, and your performance this morning caught her attention." Admiral nodded. "I was monitoring radio communications from the operations center when you handled that C-5 emergency recovery. It was exemplary work under pressure, exactly the kind of competence we need in critical positions." Sarah began to understand that this meeting was taking a very different direction than she had anticipated. "I appreciate the recognition, ma'am. I was just doing my job." "Modest as well as competent," Admiral observed with a slight smile. "Lieutenant, what I'm about to discuss with you is classified information that cannot be shared with anyone else on this base. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Admiral leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. The Navy is implementing a new program designed to identify and accelerate the career progression of outstanding junior officers, particularly in critical specialties like air traffic control. Your name has been recommended for inclusion in this program. Sarah felt stunned by the revelation. Ma'am, I'm honored by the consideration, but I don't understand why. Let me explain, Admiral interrupted gently. This program involves special assignments, advanced training opportunities, and accelerated promotions for officers who demonstrate exceptional potential. Your performance record indicates you're exactly the kind of officer we're looking for. Captain Torres, who had remained silent until now, opened his own folder and consulted several documents. Lieutenant, how would you feel about taking on additional responsibilities while maintaining your current assignment? Sir, I'm not sure I understand what kind of additional responsibilities you mean. Admiral exchanged a glance with Captain Richardson before responding. What if I told you that within the next 6 months, you could be promoted to lieutenant commander and given a position normally held by much senior officers? Sarah felt her world spinning. The possibility of such rapid advancement was almost beyond comprehension, especially given the hostile reception she had received from and his colleagues. Ma'am, that sounds incredible, but I have to ask why me? There must be other officers with more experience and seniority. Experience and seniority don't always translate to competence, Admiral replied. What we need are officers who can think clearly under pressure, maintain high-performance standards, and provide leadership in challenging situations. Your record suggests you possess all of those qualities. Captain Richardson leaned forward. Lieutenant, I want you to know that this conversation is taking place without the knowledge of your immediate chain of command. The program Admiral described requires a level of discretion that not all personnel are cleared for. The implications of his statement began to dawn on Sarah. Sir, are you saying that Commander doesn't know about this meeting? Commander is not cleared for information about this program, Admiral confirmed. In fact, his assessment of your capabilities will be an important factor in determining how we proceed. Sarah began to understand the larger game being played around her. His hostility wasn't just personal bias. It was potentially interfering with a high-level Navy initiative. Ma'am, I have to tell you that Commander has expressed some concerns about my performance. He seems to believe I'm not qualified for this assignment. Admiral's expression hardened slightly. What kind of concerns? Sarah hesitated, knowing that her next words could have significant consequences for his career. He's questioned my experience level, suggested that my procedures are inadequate, and implied that I might be better suited for a less demanding assignment. Despite your flawless performance this morning during a complex emergency situation, Captain Richardson asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Yes, sir. In fact, he was in the process of explaining his concerns when you called for this meeting. Admiral made several notes in her folder before looking back at Sarah. Lieutenant, I'm going to be direct with you. The Navy has been monitoring reports of bias and discrimination at several installations, including this one. Your assignment here is partly a test to see how qualified female officers are treated by existing command structures. Sarah felt a chill as the full scope of her situation became clear. Ma'am, are you saying I'm some kind of test case? Not exactly, Admiral replied. You're here because you're genuinely qualified for the position and because the Navy needs experienced air traffic controllers at this facility. However, your treatment by local commanders is being evaluated as part of a larger assessment of leadership effectiveness. Captain Torres consulted his notes before adding, What Admiral isn't telling you yet is that significant changes are coming to this base's command structure. Changes that could create opportunities for exceptional officers to advance much more rapidly than normal. Sarah felt her head spinning from the implications of what she was hearing. Sir, what kind of changes? Admiral closed her folder and looked directly at Sarah. Lieutenant, how do you feel about the possibility of command responsibility? Ma'am, I've always hoped to qualify for command positions eventually, but I assumed that would be years away. What if it wasn't years away? What if it was months? The question hung in the air, loaded with possibilities that Sarah had never dared to imagine. Admiral was clearly suggesting something far beyond normal career progression. Ma'am, I would welcome any opportunity to serve in a position of greater responsibility, but I want to make sure I'm truly qualified and not just filling some kind of quota." Admiral smiled for the first time during the meeting. "Lieutenant, quota candidates don't handle emergency recoveries the way you did this morning. They don't maintain perfect safety records while managing complex traffic situations. And they certainly don't earn the respect of pilots and aircrew through competent performance under pressure." Captain Richardson stood, indicating that the meeting was drawing to a close. "Lieutenant, return to your normal duties and continue performing at your current level. Don't change anything about how you're handling your assignment. We'll be in touch soon with more specific information about your future opportunities." As Sarah prepared to leave, Admiral offered one final comment. "Lieutenant, the Navy is changing. Old attitudes and biased leadership practices are being identified and corrected. Officers who demonstrate excellence regardless of gender, background, or connections are being recognized and promoted accordingly. Your career is about to take a very interesting turn." Sarah left the meeting with her mind reeling from the conversation. In the span of 30 minutes, her understanding of her situation had been completely transformed. What she had thought was a hostile assignment with limited prospects had suddenly become a stepping stone to opportunities she had never imagined possible. The walk back to her quarters gave her time to process the enormity of what had just occurred. Admiral had essentially told her that she was being considered for rapid advancement based on her performance, while simultaneously revealing that hostility was being monitored and evaluated by senior Navy leadership. As she entered her room, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her brother Alex. "How was your second day? Hope the jerks are treating you better." Sarah stared at the message, knowing she couldn't share any details of her meeting with Admiral. "Getting more interesting every day," she typed back. "Can't talk about specifics yet, but things might be looking up." What Sarah didn't know was that Admiral's visit wasn't routine, and the changes coming to the base were far more dramatic than anyone realized. Within weeks, everything about her assignment would be transformed in ways that would shock and his allies, while validating her belief that competence and integrity ultimately mattered more than politics and bias. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah settled into a routine that felt like walking a tightrope. Her performance in the control tower continued to be exemplary, earning praise from pilots and aircrew while drawing increasingly hostile scrutiny from Commander and his allies. Every shift brought new challenges that seemed designed to test her limits and expose any weakness they could exploit. Had taken to conducting surprise inspections of her work, appearing in the control tower at random times with a notepad and stopwatch to time her response to various situations. He questioned every decision, challenged her interpretations of regulations, and made pointed comments about her unconventional methods in front of other personnel. "Lieutenant," said during one such visit, "explain to me why you cleared that F-35 for approach when the preceding aircraft was still on final." Sarah maintained her composure while continuing to monitor her traffic. "Sir, the separation was well within minimums. The preceding aircraft was a C-130 with significantly different approach speeds, allowing for adequate spacing." "Adequate according to whom?" pressed. "I've seen controllers get pilots killed by cutting separation too close." The comment was clearly intended to rattle her confidence, but Sarah had learned to tune out psychological warfare while focusing entirely on her duties. Around the control tower, other personnel had begun to notice the unusual attention Sarah was receiving, leading to whispered conversations about fairness and professionalism. Lieutenant Davis, who worked the shift opposite Sarah's, had become an informal ally and source of information about base politics. During their shift changeovers, he often provided warnings about mood and plans. "Word has been asking questions about your training record," Davis told her one afternoon. "He's also been having a lot of closed-door meetings with Tours and some of the senior enlisted personnel." Sarah appreciated the intelligence, though she suspected scrutiny was being observed by people far more important than he realized. Since her meeting with Admiral, she had noticed subtle changes in how certain personnel treated her, suggesting that word of high-level interest in her career had begun to circulate through unofficial channels. Colonel Martinez, the Marine operations officer who had praised her emergency handling, had taken to stopping by the control tower more frequently. His visits always seemed casual, but Sarah noticed he often arrived during times when was conducting his inspections. "How's the new assignment treating you, Lieutenant?" Martinez asked during one such visit, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes observant. Very well, sir. The complexity here keeps things challenging and interesting. I'll bet it does, Martinez replied, glancing meaningfully at who was hovering nearby with his ever-present notepad. Complex environments really separate the competent officers from the pretenders, don't they? His face reddened at the implied criticism, but he couldn't respond directly to a senior officer without creating an incident. These subtle confrontations had become more frequent as word of Sarah's exceptional performance spread throughout the base. The breaking point came during Sarah's fourth week when a training exercise involving multiple squadrons created the most complex traffic situation the base had seen in months. Sarah was managing approaches and departures for 6 different types of aircraft, coordinating with civilian air traffic control for airspace management, and handling a medical emergency involving a helicopter with an injured crew member. Chose that moment to conduct what he called a comprehensive evaluation of her performance, positioning himself directly behind her workstation with a checklist and timer while she managed the crisis. Tower Rescue 23 declaring emergency, crew member unconscious, requesting immediate priority approach, came the urgent radio call. Sarah immediately shifted her traffic to accommodate the emergency. Rescue 23, Tower, roger your emergency. Runway 5 left is clear, medical personnel standing by. Lieutenant, interrupted loudly enough for everyone in the control tower to hear, you failed to coordinate that emergency clearance with approach control. Sarah felt her concentration waver for a split second before recovering her focus. Was deliberately trying to distract her during an emergency situation, creating a dangerous situation for the sake of making her look incompetent. All aircraft, tower, emergency aircraft inbound, extend patterns and stand by for further instructions, she transmitted while simultaneously coordinating with ground control and emergency services. The next 15 minutes tested every skill Sarah possessed as she managed the emergency recovery while continued his running commentary on her supposed failures. Despite his interference, the helicopter landed safely. The injured crew member was transported to the base hospital, and all other aircraft were handled without incident. When the crisis ended, Sarah finally turned to face directly. Sir, with respect, conducting evaluations during actual emergency situations creates unnecessary distractions that could compromise safety. His face went white with anger at being challenged publicly. How dare you question my judgment, Lieutenant? You're in no position to tell me when or how to conduct evaluations. The confrontation was witnessed by Colonel Martinez, several pilots, and the senior enlisted personnel who staffed the control tower. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone realized they were witnessing something that would have lasting consequences. Commander, Martinez said quietly, perhaps we should discuss this situation privately. Seemed to realize he had overstepped his bounds, but his anger prevented him from backing down gracefully. Colonel, this lieutenant needs to understand her place in this command structure. Her attitude is becoming a safety concern. The only safety concern I observed, Martinez replied coldly, was the disruption of emergency operations by unnecessary interference. I suggest you reconsider your evaluation methods. The standoff continued for several more seconds before stormed out of the control tower, leaving behind an atmosphere of shocked silence. Sarah knew that the confrontation would have serious consequences, though she wasn't sure whether they would fall on or herself. That evening, Sarah was surprised to receive a call from Captain Richardson's aide, requesting her immediate presence in the base commander's office. As she walked across the base in the gathering dusk, she prepared herself for either the end of her career or something completely unexpected. Captain Richardson was waiting for her in his office along with Colonel Martinez, and to Sarah's surprise, Admiral, who was participating via secure video conference from the Pentagon. Lieutenant, Admiral said from the screen, I understand there was an incident in the control tower today. Yes, ma'am. Commander was conducting an evaluation during an emergency recovery, and I expressed concern about the timing. Colonel Martinez has provided a full report on the situation, Captain Richardson said. According to his account, his behavior was unprofessional and potentially dangerous. Admiral leaned forward on the screen. Lieutenant, what I'm about to tell you is going to come as a shock. Effective immediately, there are going to be significant changes in the command structure at. Sarah felt her heart racing as she waited for the revelation. Commander has been relieved of his position as Flight Operations Officer, effective tomorrow morning. Additionally, Lieutenant Commander Torres is being transferred to a new assignment. Both actions are the result of an ongoing investigation into leadership practices and personnel management. Sarah felt stunned by the speed and scope of the changes. "Ma'am, I hope my situation didn't cause problems for—" "Lieutenant," Admiral interrupted, "let me be very clear about something. You didn't cause these problems, you exposed them. And tours have been under investigation for months due to complaints about discrimination, harassment, and unprofessional conduct toward junior personnel, particularly women and minorities." Captain Richardson consulted a folder before adding, "Your assignment here was partly designed to test their behavior under observation. Unfortunately, they failed that test spectacularly." Colonel Martinez spoke up for the first time. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that your performance throughout this entire ordeal has been exemplary. You've maintained professionalism under extreme pressure while never compromising your duties or the safety of aircraft operations." Admiral's expression became more serious. "Now for the part that's going to shock you. The Navy has approved your immediate promotion to Lieutenant Commander, effective next Monday. Additionally, you're being assigned as the new Flight Operations Officer for this base." Sarah felt the room spinning around her. "Ma'am, I don't understand. That's position, and I'm just a lieutenant with 4 years of experience." "You're a lieutenant commander with 4 years of exceptional experience, and you've demonstrated leadership capabilities under pressure that many senior officers never develop," Admiral corrected. "The position requires someone who can manage complex operations, maintain high safety standards, and provide fair leadership to diverse personnel. Your record indicates you possess all of those qualities." Captain Richardson smiled for the first time since Sarah had met him. "Lieutenant Commander, congratulations on your promotion and your new assignment. You're about to become one of the youngest flight operations officers in the Navy." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the rapid transformation of her situation. "Sir, ma'am, I'm honored by the confidence you're showing in me, but I want to make sure I'm truly qualified for this level of responsibility." "The Navy doesn't promote people to fill quotas," Admiral said firmly. "You've earned this advancement through competence, integrity, and performance under pressure. The fact that you're questioning your readiness rather than assuming you deserve it actually confirms that we've made the right choice." Colonel Martinez added, "Commander, you'll have full support from the Marine units on base. We've been impressed with your professionalism and technical skills since day one." Admiral provided additional details about the transition. "And tours will be gone by Friday. You'll spend the weekend being briefed on administrative responsibilities and command procedures. Monday morning, you'll assume full duties as Flight Operations Officer with authority over all air traffic control operations at this base." As the meeting concluded, Sarah found herself holding promotion papers and assignment orders that would change her life completely. In less than a month, she had gone from being a junior officer facing hostility and discrimination to becoming one of the youngest department heads at a major military installation. Walking back to her quarters, Sarah called her brother Alex to share the incredible news. "Wait, slow down," Alex said after she had breathlessly explained the situation. "You're telling me you went from being harassed by your boss to getting promoted and taking his job. I know it sounds unbelievable, but apparently the Navy has been investigating him for months. My assignment was partly a test case to document how he treated qualified personnel." "So you were right all along. Competence and integrity do matter more than politics and bias." Sarah looked across the base toward the control tower where she would soon be in charge of all operations. "I guess we're about to find out. This is either going to be the best opportunity of my career or the biggest challenge I've ever faced." What Sarah didn't realize was that her story was already becoming legend throughout the Navy's air traffic control community, inspiring other young officers who had faced similar challenges, while sending a clear message that merit and professionalism would be recognized and rewarded regardless of traditional barriers. Monday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and a sense of anticipation that seemed to permeate the entire base. Sarah stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the lieutenant commander insignia that still felt surreal on her collar. At 28 years old, she was about to assume command responsibilities that typically went to officers with 10 or 15 years of experience. The weekend had been a whirlwind of briefings, administrative training, and meetings with department heads who would now be reporting to her. Captain Richardson had personally conducted much of the transition, ensuring Sarah understood not just the technical aspects of her new role, but the leadership challenges that came with managing a diverse team of air traffic controllers, radar technicians, and support personnel. As she walked toward the control tower for her first day as flight operations officer, Sarah noticed the changed atmosphere on base. Word of sudden departure had spread quickly, along with news of her dramatic promotion. Some personnel regarded her with newfound respect, others with curiosity, and a few with obvious skepticism about her age and experience level. Lieutenant Davis was waiting for her at the entrance to the tower, his expression a mixture of congratulation and amazement. "Commander, congratulations on the promotion. I have to say, this is the most dramatic change in leadership I've ever witnessed." "Thank you, Davis. I hope I can live up to the confidence that's been placed in me." "If your performance over the past month is any indication, you'll do just fine," Davis replied. "The crew is excited to work for someone who actually understands air traffic control instead of just managing it from behind a desk." As they climbed the stairs to the control room, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The dozen personnel who staffed the tower would be looking to her for leadership, guidance, and support. Many of them had years more experience than she did, and earning their respect would require consistent demonstration of competence and fairness. The control room buzzed with its usual morning activity as controllers prepared for the day's operations. As Sarah entered, the conversations gradually died down as everyone turned to see their new commanding officer. She could feel the mixture of anticipation and evaluation in their collective gaze. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "As you know, I'm Lieutenant Commander, your new flight operations officer. I want to take a few minutes to talk about how we're going to work together." She positioned herself where everyone could see her clearly, drawing on leadership training that had seemed theoretical until this moment. "First, let me say that I have tremendous respect for the professionalism and skill I've observed in this facility. The safety record here is outstanding, and that's a direct result of your dedication and competence." Senior Chief Petty Officer Williams, a 20-year veteran who served as the senior enlisted advisor, stepped forward. "Ma'am, the crew has been looking forward to working under your command. We've all heard about your performance during emergency situations and your technical expertise." Sarah felt grateful for the public show of support from the senior enlisted leadership. "Thank you, Senior Chief. I want everyone to know that my approach to leadership is based on trust, clear communication, and mutual respect. I'm not here to change everything overnight or impose unnecessary new procedures." She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "What I am here to do is support you in doing your jobs effectively, advocate for resources and training you need, and ensure that everyone is treated fairly and professionally. If you have concerns, problems, or suggestions, my door is always open." Petty Officer, one of the radar technicians, raised her hand tentatively. "Ma'am, will there be changes to our shift schedules or operational procedures?" "Not unless there are specific problems that need addressing," Sarah replied. "The current system seems to be working well. However, I do want to establish regular feedback sessions where we can discuss ways to improve efficiency and address any issues that arise." The morning briefing concluded with Sarah reviewing the day's flight schedule and weather conditions with her team. The complexity of operations remained impressive, with training flights, operational missions, and support aircraft creating a constant flow of traffic that required careful coordination. Around 900, Sarah was settling into the administrative aspects of her new role when Captain Richardson appeared in the control tower, accompanied by a visitor she didn't recognize. "Commander," Richardson said, "I'd like you to meet Rear Admiral James, Commander Naval Air Forces Atlantic. He wanted to personally congratulate you on your promotion." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she found herself face-to-face with one of the Navy's most senior aviation commanders. Admiral was a legend in naval aviation circles, known for his exceptional leadership and commitment to operational excellence. "Congratulations, Commander," Admiral said, extending his hand. I've been following your career progression with great interest. Your performance here has been remarkable. Thank you, sir. I'm honored to serve in this position and committed to maintaining the high standards this facility is known for. Admiral nodded approvingly. I understand you've had some challenges with previous leadership here. That kind of situation is exactly what we're working to eliminate throughout the Navy. Your example of perseverance and professionalism sets the standard for how we want our officers to respond to adversity. As they spoke, Sarah noticed several personnel in the control room stealing glances at the conversation. Having such senior leadership visit to personally recognize her promotion sent a clear message about the Navy's confidence in her abilities. Commander, Admiral continued, I want you to know that your rapid advancement isn't just recognition of your individual achievements. It's part of a broader effort to ensure that the Navy's best and officers advance based on merit rather than politics or bias. Captain Richardson added, Admiral has been instrumental in developing the accelerated promotion program that identified you as a candidate for rapid advancement. Admiral consulted his watch before concluding the visit. Commander, keep up the excellent work. The Navy needs more leaders like you, and I suspect this won't be your last promotion if you continue performing at this level. After the senior officers departed, Sarah returned to her duties with a renewed sense of purpose and responsibility. The visit from Admiral had been both inspiring and intimidating, reinforcing the significance of her position while raising expectations for her continued performance. The rest of the morning passed smoothly until around 1100, when a situation arose that would test Sarah's command abilities in a very different way. Ensign Parker, the young pilot who had been friendly to her during her first week, appeared in the control tower looking agitated and concerned. Commander, I need to speak with you privately about a serious matter, he said, his voice tense with worry. Sarah led him to a small office adjacent to the control room where they could talk without interruption. What's going on, Parker? Ma'am, I've been hearing some disturbing comments from a few of the older pilots about your promotion. Nothing direct or official, but there's definitely some resentment about what they're calling political correctness gone wrong. Sarah felt a familiar chill at the implication. What kind of comments specifically? Things like questioning whether you're really qualified or suggesting that your promotion was just to fill some kind of diversity quota. A couple of guys are apparently planning to file complaints about having to take orders from someone they consider unqualified. Sarah appreciated Parker's warning, though she had suspected that not everyone would welcome her rapid advancement. Parker, I want you to know that I take these concerns seriously. If anyone has legitimate questions about my qualifications or decisions, they should bring them to me directly through proper channels. Ma'am, with respect, I don't think these are legitimate concerns. I've flown with controllers all over the Navy, and your technical skills are as good as anyone I've worked with. This seems more like sour grapes from people who can't accept change. Before Sarah could respond, Senior Chief Williams appeared in the doorway. Ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention. Sarah and Parker returned to the control room to find elevated tension among the staff. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, a senior pilot from one of the fighter squadrons, was standing near the primary control station with several other officers, his voice loud enough to be heard clearly by everyone present. I'm just saying that rapid promotions based on political considerations create problems for everyone, Hayes was saying. When people advance too quickly, they don't have the experience base to handle real crises. The comment was clearly directed at Sarah, though Hayes was speaking to the other pilots rather than addressing her directly. It was a calculated challenge to her authority designed to undermine confidence in her leadership. Sarah walked directly to where Hayes was standing, her voice calm but firm. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, I understand you have concerns about command decisions. If you'd like to discuss them, my office is available for a private conversation. Hayes turned to face her, his expression showing no hint of respect for her rank. Actually, Commander, I think my concerns are shared by enough people that they should be discussed openly. The control room fell silent as everyone realized they were witnessing a direct challenge to Sarah's authority. How she handled this confrontation would establish the tone for her entire tenure as Flight Operations Officer. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of command, you have two choices. You can either bring your concerns to me through proper channels, or you can continue disrupting operations in my control tower. If you choose the latter, I'll have you removed from this facility and recommend disciplinary action." Hayes seemed surprised by the firmness of her response. He had clearly expected her to be intimidated by his challenge or to try to accommodate his criticism. "Are you threatening me, Commander?" he asked, his tone becoming more aggressive. "I'm enforcing standards of professional conduct in my command," Sarah replied. "The same standards that apply to every officer regardless of rank or background." Senior Chief Williams stepped forward, positioning himself slightly behind Sarah in a clear show of support. "Sir, the commander is correct. This facility has operational responsibilities that require professional conduct from all personnel." Several other enlisted personnel nodded in agreement, creating a visible alignment behind Sarah's leadership. Hayes looked around the room, realizing that his challenge had backfired and that he had isolated himself rather than undermining her authority. "This conversation isn't over," Hayes said as he prepared to leave. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied firmly. "The next conversation will be in writing through official channels, following proper military protocol." Hayes left the control tower with his supporters, but the incident had established something important about Sarah's leadership style. She would not be intimidated by challenges to her authority, and she would enforce professional standards regardless of who violated them. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's reputation as a fair but firm leader spread throughout the base. Personnel who had initially been skeptical of her age and experience level gradually came to respect her competence and integrity. Her door remained open to legitimate concerns and suggestions, but she consistently shut down attempts to undermine her authority through political maneuvering or discrimination. 3 months after her promotion, Sarah received a letter that would have seemed impossible during those early days of harassment and discrimination. Admiral had written to inform her that she was being considered for selection to the Navy's command school, with the possibility of being assigned to lead her own base within 2 years. As Sarah stood in the control tower one evening, watching aircraft launch for night training missions, she reflected on the dramatic transformation her career had taken. The young woman who had arrived at facing hostility and bias had become a respected leader whose example was inspiring other officers throughout the Navy. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Alex. "Saw an article about rapid promotions in the Navy that mentioned your story. Proud of you, sis. You proved that integrity and competence really do matter." Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "Just getting started. The Navy is changing, and I'm honored to be part of making it better for everyone who serves." Looking out at the base that had once seemed like a hostile environment, Sarah now saw it as confirmation that the military she loved was evolving into an organization that truly valued merit over bias, competence over connections, and integrity over politics. Her story had become proof that excellence could overcome prejudice, and that sometimes the people who try to tear you down only succeed in revealing your strength.